Cast your mind back 23 years. It's midsummer. You Remind Me by Usher is the biggest song in the country. Newly minted President George W. Bush is struggling to stay above water in the approval ratings after a tumultuous election season with no improvement on the horizon, and Gamemaker 4.0 hit the shelves of the freeware internet. Gamemaker 4 made several notable improvements from its predecessor, including a full codebase rewrite, new UI, and a change from the old blue ball and hammer logo to the iconic red one. Also bundled with the new release were several new tutorials to introduce new users to the capabilities of the program. These same tutorials would be included with every GM release for the next 5 years: Red Pac-Man, Street Racer, and of course, 1945. These are all pretty straightforward takes on existing games, and serve as a good showcase of the basic level functionality of the program. When I first downloaded Gamemaker a few years and versions later, the game that captured my interest more than the others was 1945. This is a scrolling plane shooter based heavily, as is clear from the name, on the Psycho arcade game Strikers 1945. Though obviously featuring less content and variance in the gameplay, the GM tutorial 1945 still has a skill progression, slowly introducing new enemy types, and even automatically upgrading your plane as your score increases. It uses the simple elements to good effect, and is memorable because of it. Another memorable thing about this tutorial is the background music that is included with it. It's an energetic Midi track that has a lot of beautiful harmonic complexity, but nonetheless invokes a sort of wistful nostalgia, though my history with the song might bias me on this point. For these reasons, when I made my first major Gamemaker game, 2006's Snail Man Maze, I lifted the 1945 song for use as background music. This not only associated the song with one of my first ever games made as a child, but forged an inextricable connection in my brain between the song and the identity of Snail Man, which I would adopt as my online persona soon after to release my games, and become part of the Gamemaker community for the next 15 years. When I had the idea to start this channel, in order to talk about Gamemaker and the games it spawned, I naturally decided to continue using Snail Man, both as a nod to the past, and a way for old friends and acquaintances from my time in the community to identify me. When dreaming up the project, I also had an idea for a cool hand-animated intro which would morph through several historical versions of the Gamemaker logo up to the modern day and sync it up with a jingle. You see, in the years since retreating from the Gamemaker community, the hobbyist energy I used to expend there has largely been redirected into music, so I thought composing a little original ditty would be a cool way to marry these interests together. When thinking about what musical motifs to use for inspiration, I naturally followed the same line that I did for my channel name, and composed a little 5-second jingle using the opening line from the original Snail Man Maze song, aka the original 1945 song. Happy with this creation, I forgot about it as I worked on the scripts for the channel proper. As I was working on putting my first proper video together though, a dive on 2007's Red Hero, YouTuber HBomberGuy dropped a 4-hour-long video essay covering plagiarism on YouTube, detailing the shoddy crediting practices and outright stealing of several big creators. This got me thinking about properly citing my sources, which I already had been doing in my scripts, but this really got me thinking about it. And as I was editing the Red Hero video, I remembered the jingle I had made and figured it would probably be best practice to credit the original creator of the song I'd based it off of. Back when I put the song in Snail Man Maze, I credited Gamemaker creator Mark Overmars with making the music, but looking back on this claim as an adult, I figured a Dutch computer scientist would probably not also be a prolific MIDI composer, so I decided to do some digging. The problem? This information is, so far as I can tell, not anywhere on the internet. I googled every variation of 1945 music and Gamemaker 6 1945 tutorial music that I could think of, but this led me nowhere besides YouTube re-uploads of the track that also did not credit the creator. Just googling was clearly a dead end, so I decided to go about it a bit more sideways. You see, the old Gamemaker download page also had links to several resource packs, which contained freeware assets that anybody could use for their games. The most notable among these was Resource Pack 2, collected by True Predator, a massive collection of freeware tracks for background music, almost all of which were MIDI arrangements of existing popular and video game tunes. Because of this, many early Gamemaker titles featured background music that was from other video games, leading to a phenomenon where, for the rest of my life, someone would play me Cranky's theme from Donkey Kong Country, and I'd be like, no man, that's the Heaven's Mist theme from Red Hero, and they'd be like, what? Anyway, all of this to say that the whole old video game songs repurposed into new background music thing was very common in the old days of GameMaker. The 1945 song is not in Resource Pack 2, but I figured it was still likely to be a video game song, so my next move was to go straight to the source. That is, the game upon which 1945 is based, Strikers 1945. My logic being, of course, if the look and gameplay of the 1945 tutorial was lifted from the arcade game, then why not the music too? Thankfully, I found a website that hosted not only the entire Strikers 1945 OST, but the OST of every single variant and sequel that exists, and there are quite a few. Strikers 1945, Strikers 1945 Plus, Strikers 1945 for the Saturn, Strikers 1945 for the PS1, Strikers 1945 2, Strikers 1945 3, Strikers 1945 3 for mobile, Android, and iOS. Each of these versions has a slightly different soundtrack, and I listened to all of them. Okay, well, not the mobile one, but all the rest. Composing for these games was all done by Masaki Izutani, with co-credit on the third game going to Kensuke Satoh. The music is very good, using rock arrangements that harken back to 80s action movies and US World War II militarism simultaneously, and can hang with some of the finest examples of the genre. I particularly like the Battle for the Extreme North (C) stage from 2, which is just hook after hook after hook, incredible songwriting. And after listening to all these themes from all the versions of all the stages in all the games, I can confidently say the 1945 song isn't on there. The Strikers music is really good, but it's a completely different compositional style than the 1945 song, so I was pretty sure after just a few tracks I wouldn't find it, but for completionist's sake I checked anyway, and nope. I would have to look somewhere else, and my next lead was found on the old defunct GameMaker site, Gamemaker.nl. This site was launched in 2003, a couple of years after GameMaker 4, but 4 was still the current version when the site went up, so I hoped to find some credits on there. I went to the trusty Wayback Machine, which has the earliest capture of the site as of February 21st, 2003. Maybe. Though this is the date archived on the Wayback Machine, there are archived news articles on the site from as late as April 2003, when GameMaker 5 was released, so I'm not sure the exact date from this capture. At any rate though, if we go to the download page, we can find a link to download GameMaker 4.3, as well as the aforementioned Resource Pack 2, and a link to download 10 looping MIDI tracks composed by Dung Truong. If we download the zip, we find nothing because the download wasn't archived. Still, I had kind of a feeling that this lead was a good one, so I attempted to follow up on it. I searched everywhere I could think of for mirrors of this MIDI background pack. Unfortunately, Dung Truong is a pretty common Vietnamese name, and Googling it, even with such additions as composer, MIDI, and music, yielded nothing of value. One roadblock with this search was also that the majority of the results from these searches were obviously in Vietnamese, a language which I do not speak, which I'm pretty sure you could figure out from me fighting for my life to try and get Dung Truong right. Eventually, I abandoned this line of inquiry too. At this point in the search, all I knew about the 1945 song was that it was included in the 1945 tutorial, which was bundled in GameMaker 6.1. You see, I hadn't done any of the research that I put at the top of this video. It was around this point in the search, actually, that I had the thought, hey, this might make a cool video, and started writing the script. In order to write the intro, I started by looking up when GameMaker 6 was released, and it was in 2004, so I started the intro by referencing Usher's Confessions Part 2 as the biggest song in the country. But as I was writing that, I realized that I didn't actually know for sure what version of GameMaker the 1945 tutorial first appeared in. So I go back to Web Archive, find a download of all the old GameMaker versions from 1 to 6, and start working my way backwards. I install GameMaker 5 and find that the 1945 tutorial was bundled with GameMaker 5. I install GameMaker 4 and find that the tutorial was in GameMaker 4. I install GameMaker 3 and it's not there. And you know, I check all the GM3 tutorials just to make sure that the song doesn't appear in any of them, and it doesn't, so now I know for sure that the song appeared for the very first time in GM4. I know when to start the intro, so I go back and I change the Usher song and all that. But as I was installing all these versions, I'm checking through the license agreements and I'm checking through the readmes, I'm looking everywhere I can to find where credits to this song might be. The GameMaker 6 readme is actually in the form of a web page and has no mention of the tutorials at all, or the assets in them. In the GameMaker 5 readme, it's the same story, no mention of it at all. And then I check the GameMaker 4 readme and I find this. I would like to thank everybody who commented on the previous versions of GameMaker, in particular the people who served as beta testers and those who provided sprites and other images, (see the documentation). So first of all, I'm kind of ecstatic, because this is literally the first mention that I can find at all of who provided the assets for these tutorials. And it's kind of weird because none of the later versions even have this very basic acknowledgement, and the only reason I can think of why this is that version 5.3 of GameMaker introduced limitations on its functionality to users without a paid registration, which makes GameMaker 4 the last freeware version and GameMaker 5 the first shareware version. But second of all, I'm like, what documentation? There's no documentation. Am I not reading the documentation right now? So after thinking it over for a bit, I remember. GameMaker has this feature that was pretty seldom used in big GameMaker games, but by default in the game, when you press F1, it'll bring up a help screen. This is like a big text entry thing, but you can do fancy fonts and all of that, and this is meant to be the default help screen that everybody uses, but most games just program their own tutorials or help screens or whatever, because this thing is just kind of seen as tacky and newbie. But this is a tutorial, so they don't care about that. So I launched the 1945 tutorial game, press F1, and in plain sight all along, there it is. Background music by Dung Truong, and an email address. There it is. Finally, a definitive credit I can put in all my videos. It's not Mark Overmars, I think, it's Dung Truong. I'm done. Video over. Okay, but at this point, I'm in too deep. I want more information. I want more of the Dung Truong discography, and it just so happens that I just found not only the piece of information I've been searching for, but another piece of information that is maybe even more valuable: their email address. So I started by doing the normal people thing of shooting a quick email to Dung, explaining who I was and asking if they could answer a couple questions about their music. Then I got to work exploiting the major advantage that email addresses provide over knowing a person's real name. They're completely unique. There are plenty of Dung Truongs out there, but there's only one person with that email. So I proceeded to Google the email address in quotes. 2 results. One is a profile of an Unreal Engine forum from 24 years ago, and the other is an Italian language copyright page for a Pygame tutorial. It turns out that this page credits a Midi to Dung Truong, saying the creator, quote, found it on his computer. I went almost all the way through this tutorial looking for where the Midi might be, and let me remind you that this tutorial is in Italian, a language which I do not speak, but with a bit of help from Google Translate, I found the step called sounds, and it wasn't there. Eventually, I just scrubbed through every single step of the tutorial until finding a resource folder download in the images step. This download kept failing. Like, the link wasn't broken. It started the download with a 45 megabyte zip called resource every time, but then right as the download was finishing, it would say failed, and only a .part file would appear in the downloads folder. It was infuriating. Even weirder, it's not like there was a corrupted bit in the download making it fail, because the .part file was a slightly different size for every attempt. I had to use Microsoft Edge to download this folder. Microsoft Edge! But it was all worth it, because finally I had it in front of me. I opened the folder, navigate to the MIDI_DT folder, where the tutorial pointed to the music, and I opened the first file, illusionworld.mid. And it's the song. No longer known as the 1945 tutorial song, a real name for the song, and 9 other songs with it. After Illusion World, we have Innerpiece.mid, a tranquil track that could be suitable for an introspective cutscene. I wouldn't say it's as good as Illusion World, but for what it is, it's very functional. Inner Stampede is a bombastic melody featuring the MIDI bird tweet sound prominently, and would be very well suited for an animal-themed chase scene, though a bit grating for recreational listening. Next, we have Joyful Life, a tune based on a series of quick arpeggios, with a kind of thundering low end in the background. Joyful Life Remix expands on this idea by bumping it up a few keys, tweaking the arrangement, and adding a prominent bass part and an organ playing a whole mess of chords. I like this version a lot better, as the organ part adds a huge amount of harmonic interest to the piece, and the bouncing bass line makes it feel far more dynamic than the original. It's still a bit of a dense listen, and the inhumanely timed piano arpeggio can still get on my nerves, but that's a MIDI issue, not a song issue, and the song is very good. The next track is called No Worry, and it's an energetic tune that's a variation on some of the musical themes from Illusion World. The harmonic movement mimics it at many points, as well as the consistent 8th note melody, but it's different enough to be its own distinct work, evoking a kind of tropical feel from the airy synths and steel drum lead. This track also has a remix which changes up the arrangement and instrumentation a bit, but is not substantively different from the original. Rock On is another variation on the similar themes, and something that sounded so familiar upon listening that I was sure it was in some vintage GameMaker game that I'd played before. I sent it to my script supervisor and childhood friend Ragnaps to see if he recognized it too, but he didn't. Spirit Within is based on an organ arpeggio line that has a similar chord structure to the ones we've seen, but the arrangement is very solid, also featuring sea noises in the background, and I actually caught myself getting emotional listening to it. It feels like a variation on the original Illusion theme that implies movement and growth, like I'm coming full circle in a way, to hear this song 18 years after becoming fascinated with the original composition. I don't know, it's good. Finally, Still Here is an up-tempo rewrite of Spirit Within that is fun, despite featuring some of the hallmark quirks of MIDI composition and thus being a little grating on the ears. With that out of the way, I have to admit that I buried the lead a little bit. Back on the Italian copyright page, it wasn't only mentioned that Dung Truong's music was used in the tutorial, but it also had a link to their website. Now, this link is very obviously broken, as is noted on this page, but we all know what to do with broken links.
The way back was working beautifully.
This site was archived in mid-2002 and is confirmed to belong to Dung Truong by the copyright line. As it turns out, this is one of many independent GameMaker fan sites that existed around this time, hosting resources, tutorials, and games for other amateur GameMaker creators. The homepage even has a plea to vote for the site on the GM Top Sites ranking. Don't ask. When I found this site, I don't know why, but I was really surprised that the guy who composed the 1945 song was also a GameMaker user. Like, I kind of assumed that the MIDI files would just have been passed around and around on the internet for years before falling into Mark Overmars' hands, and that the original creator would be totally divorced from the program their song would eventually end up in, but no. In addition to visual and programming resources, Zung's website has a page with free-to-use audio files, including a list of free-to-download music packs. This disclaimer at the top really freaked me out when I first found the site, because it says most of the resources here were not created by me, and the top folder is also a 10-song collection explicitly credited as having been collected by someone else. But the file size doesn't match up between this and the Gamemaker.nl download, and further down we find this classic melodies.zip, which has 10 songs explicitly stated to have been composed by Zung, and is the same size as the Gamemaker.nl link, which also led to a file named melodies.zip. The link on Zung's website is also broken, by the way, but if I compare the size of this download with the zipped size of the MIDI_DT file from the Italian tutorial resource, they're basically the same, so I feel pretty comfortable saying that this is the same collection of songs as we just covered from that source, even though I can't prove it 100%. Elsewhere on this website, we can find more useful GameMaker resources, including tutorials, sprites, programming tips, external sites, and games. Unfortunately, I can't make any of the download links here work, but the description of Zung's only game on here, Astro Hybrid, reads as follows. This is my first real game created with the old version of GameMaker. It is a fast-paced horizontal shooter that I have gotten quite a few positive feedbacks on. Please download it and give it a try. You might think that this game sucked because it was made with the old version, but the truth is that it's even better than most of the games made with the current version. Interestingly, the site also links to Atlantis by Mr. Chubbigans, who would go on to create Sandbox of God, Or No Riori, and Cook Surf Delicious. Besides the download links, the one part of the site that I really wanted to see the most, and the one part that also happens to be completely broken, is the About page. Specifically, the one part of the About page that seems to concern Zung themselves. www.gmegamixbeariesworld.net/webmaster.html was only archived one time by the Wayback Machine, and this was a snapshot from 2016 that redirects to the hilariously generic URL game.co.uk. From all the evidence I've been able to find, Zung has not been active online since 2002. My email has, as of the latest revision of this script, been left unanswered. I have no idea what Dung Truong is up to in the last 20 years, but I do know, and I hope that they know too, that their music has been fundamentally influential to generations of creators. People who were just getting their start making games and just wanted some music to make their own project feel like a real game. Because of its place in one of the main tutorials in GameMaker, included in so many versions that were some kids' first taste of game creation, for a generation of people who have had the chance to enter adulthood, there's no doubt in my mind that many of the games we are playing today have been influenced in some small way by Zung's work. I think this whole experience for me has hammered home the importance and the tragedy of free resources. These are things that are so widely shared and used that they may have influenced thousands and thousands of people, but because they are free and because they're used by mostly kids, proper credit is rarely given, and it can take a rabbit hole of research to just find the name of the person who composed the piece of music you like. I'm not sure exactly what the point of all this is. Maybe just to say, if you create something, anything at all, and put it out into the world for free, thank you. And I'm sorry. And you deserve better. You deserve your name to be heard.
So, I want you guys to be on Use Your Illusion, only now it's illusion with an A.